That old rifle I'd kept hidden for years could have been American-made for all I knew. I had it set up in a sturdy tree overlooking the pool at Jackson Ellison's estate. Wearing rubber gloves and holding a small scope, I was about 70 yards away, close enough to see every detail by the pool, where a few lounge chairs were spread out. My wife Lauren, with her dark brown hair and striking features, worked for Ellison and had recently started spending weekends at his place. This marked the 4th consecutive weekend, and she hadn't even bothered to hide it. She told me outright that she intended to get involved with him whenever his wife, Vanessa, was away doing charity work. Whether Vanessa knew was unclear, but there was no doubt the estate staff were well aware. Ellison and Lauren strolled toward the pool, him in swim trunks, her in a skimpy top that left little to the imagination. I'd seen them like this before and knew the routine. Over the past few weeks, I'd taken the time to observe and familiarize myself with every detail of that estate, but today I had finally resolved what needed to be done. Lauren and Ellison made quite the picture-perfect pair. I'll admit. He had the sculpted, magazine cover looks and the kind of physique that probably had all the women around him swooning. Maybe I could even see the allure, but that didn't mean I accepted it. From the moment Lauren had first mentioned her intentions, I'd opposed it, and she knew it. 16 years of marriage and 2 teenage daughters later, she decided to throw it all away for this guy. Our twin girls, Sandra and Sarah, were now 15, looking more like their mother every day. They were staying at my parents' house, preparing for football camp, while I was supposedly out biking with my longtime friend and business partner, Mark Kirby. Mark and I had built a business from the ground up and had done well for ourselves. He was married to Sally, his childhood sweetheart. Funny enough, back in the day, Sally had been both of ours. I never quite understood why she chose Mark over me, but eventually I met Lauren in college, and she seemed like everything I wanted. I watched as Ellison and Lauren embraced by the pool, then leaned in for a kiss. After they broke apart, I steadied myself, and moments later Ellison's chest burst open, his body jerking away from Lauren, who screamed and stumbled, collapsing to the ground. Blood was everywhere as she crawled toward the pool and plunged in, trying to escape the horror she had just witnessed. I'd seen enough. Carefully, I climbed down from the tree, made my way up the hill, and tossed the rifle into some nearby bushes. Stripping off the stock cover and gloves, I stuffed them into a plastic bag and tucked it into my belt. I jogged over to my bike, took a quick glance around to confirm I was alone, then pedaled 3 miles to meet up with Mark. Once I joined him on the trail, we rode together for another 6 miles, eventually stopping at his place, where I discreetly disposed of the plastic bag in a nearby dumpster. The rifle didn't worry me. I'd kept it clean of any DNA, and it wasn't the only one I owned. An acquaintance who had passed away had left me 2 rifles and a few old pistols years back. This particular rifle, though, I'd never kept in the safe with the others. It was hidden in the garage, ready for a day like today. When Lauren first told me she'd be heading out with Ellison, my mind had immediately drifted to that rifle. The following week, I'd taken her to our property under the pretense of target practice. She had no idea that I was actually calibrating it, preparing it. After Mark and I finished the ride and returned to his place, his wife Sally greeted us with cold beers. "How was the ride, guys?" she asked. Mark answered, "Great. Quiet trail, solid workout." After we'd showered, we settled by the pool, and Sally, never one to shy away from tough questions, asked Lewis, "How long are you going to put up with these weekends of Lauren's?" Sally knew about the situation. I'd confided in both her and Mark. While she'd advised me to kick Lauren out immediately, Mark had suggested waiting. If only to protect the business and the girls. But I had already made up my mind. I couldn't stand men who went after other people's wives, especially my own. I shrugged. "No idea, Sally, but I'd like to keep this family together." She shook her head. "I still think it's time to walk away." Lewis, Sally, and Lauren had never been close, even though our families occasionally spent time together. Lauren usually mingled with her country club friends, while Sally was more involved in local politics and book clubs. Sitting there, I found myself reflecting on the past year and how blind I'd been. For 20 months, I'd thought everything was fine. Nothing had changed, not even in the bedroom. She'd still been at our daughter's games, cheering like always. Then one night, out of nowhere, she told me, "Lewis, I'm going to do something, and I hope it doesn't ruin things. I love you, but..." She trailed off before adding, "I have feelings for Jackson. His wife's away every weekend, so I'll be going there starting this Friday. I don't know how long it'll last." I kept my face expressionless, giving nothing away, but inside I'd already decided I wouldn't stop her. And as for Jackson, he was already a dead man in my mind. As for Lauren, I hadn't yet figured out her fate, but the rifle in the garage was on my mind. Without meaning to, a smile crept onto my face. Lauren noticed and shot me a look. "What's so funny?" she asked, irritated. "Nothing," I replied, still smiling, which seemed to unsettle her. After a moment she said, "Look, we haven't done anything yet, just a few kisses. I'll be staying in the guest house. Let me know when you're finished with him." Then I replied flatly, "We'll see what's left of us." I went upstairs to pack an overnight bag, leaving her sitting in the living room, visibly unnerved but still resolute in her plans. It was only Wednesday, but she was already looking forward to her weekend with Jackson. Young, wealthy, well-educated, and sculpted like a statue, that's how she described him. She'd admitted her attraction after catching him working out shirtless in the office gym. She imagined the affair might last a few months, maybe even evolve into something lasting. Sure, she valued the life I'd built for her, but she claimed she craved more excitement. She was confident that, in the end, we'd somehow find a way to work things out. That night, I barely slept, my mind running through the possibilities over and over. The twins were with friends for the weekend, which gave me a chance to clear my head, think things through, and double-check my firearms stash. By Thursday, my usual lunch at the cafe felt different. I sometimes shared a meal there with Daisy Smith, a young woman with an athletic build and dark hair, who in some ways reminded me of Sally. We'd been exchanging glances and light flirtations for weeks, but I hadn't thought of pursuing anything more until Lauren announced her arrangement. That Thursday, instead of sitting across from Daisy, I slid into the booth next to her. She was used to getting attention, and she noticed the change right away. I could tell she was pleased. She'd been keeping a seat open next to her for a while, maybe waiting for me to take the hint. She knew I was married but seemed genuinely interested. She turned to me with a confident smile. "Something's different, isn't it?" she asked. I smirked. "Yeah, my wife's decided she'd rather be with her boss," placing her hand on my thigh, she murmured. "How about dinner and dancing tomorrow night?" I grinned, feeling a bit reckless. She reached over, lightly patting my cheek, and the attraction between us was undeniable. Unable to resist any longer, I kissed her softly on the lips. We exchanged numbers before I headed back to work, feeling like a teenager with a new crush. A few folks at the office probably noticed my change in mood, and were likely wondering what was going on with me. When I got home that evening, Lauren surprised me with an offer. "I made lasagna and salad," she said, clearly hoping to smooth things over. She probably expected me to be heartbroken, but my response caught her off guard. "Thanks. I'm hungry," I replied, sounding calmer than I felt. She looked confused, maybe even suspicious, as if she were wondering if I'd already moved on. After washing up, we sat down to eat, and she finally broke the silence. "I'm going to his place tomorrow." I looked at her, keeping my expression neutral. "It's not too late to change your mind, Lauren. I think you're going to regret this." She paused, sensing something different in my tone. For a brief moment, I glimpsed the old Lauren, but she quickly dismissed it. "I need this, Louis," she said. I smirked, colder than usual. "I don't think we're talking about the same kind of need." Lauren, she cleared our plates, then made one final attempt. "Will you come to bed with me tonight?" she asked. "No," I replied flatly. "I'll see you after you're done with the rich guy. Things will be clearer by then." She looked disappointed. I think she'd imagined a warm night together to mark the end of this phase of her marriage, but I couldn't play along. As I left for the guest house, I could feel her gaze on me as she sat alone at the table, probably realizing the magnitude of what she was risking. I doubted she'd ever look at me the same way again, but she'd already made her choice. By Friday evening, she'd packed her things before work, tucking a new, tight-fitting nightgown into her bag. When she arrived at the office, Jackson was there, pulling her in for a kiss as soon as his office door closed. They'd planned to leave separately to avoid drawing attention, but by 6 p.m., she was already on her way to his place. He welcomed her with open arms, and she followed him eagerly to the master bedroom. He struggled to lift her, a not-so-subtle reminder he wasn't as strong as I was. After an intense but brief session, Lauren seemed convinced they were destined for something meaningful. They went downstairs for dinner, where Jackson had prepared an elaborate meal. "Did you enjoy yourself?" he asked, clearly pleased. "Very much," she replied, smiling back. Playfully, she started singing Simply the Best, though it stirred a pang of guilt, as she and I used to sing it together. Later, they relaxed in the bedroom, watching a romantic movie. Jackson was eager to take things further, but she insisted on finishing the movie first. They had one more round, though it was less intense this time. Meanwhile, I picked Daisy up from her apartment in my classic MGB convertible, one of my few indulgences. She was thrilled, looking incredible in a dark red dress with a plunging neckline, and I was just as impressed. We had a great dinner at the Marriott International Hotel, then went dancing nearby. She moved with such sensuality and grace that she caught me off guard, reminding me of Sally, only younger and even more elegant on the dance floor. We danced until a shared impulse made us both want to head somewhere more private. Daisy slid into the passenger seat, giving me a look that said it all. "Take me to your place," she whispered. I managed to stay composed as I drove us there. 15 minutes later, I opened the door, letting her in, and the moment we stepped inside, we couldn't hold back. Before we knew it, we were wrapped up in each other right there in the living room, losing ourselves in a kind of intensity I hadn't felt in years. Morning light poured in as we woke together. We showered side by side, and I went to the kitchen to make breakfast. Daisy watched me, a look of affection and caution in her eyes, as I served eggs and toast. She finally spoke. "Louis, I have to say it, I'm in love with you." I was surprised, but her words felt genuine. "I think it's mutual," I replied, feeling it myself. Once we finished breakfast, Daisy looked at me with a grin. "So, what's next?" she asked. I just smiled, pulling her close again. "I think I have an idea." Meanwhile, Lauren's weekend continued as planned, and I guess she was enjoying herself at Jackson's estate. But I was too wrapped up in my own time with Daisy to dwell on it. Sunday afternoon rolled around, and Lauren and Jackson agreed to meet again next weekend. As for Daisy and me, we were already planning our next date, set for Friday, and had arranged to meet for lunch in between. Each day that week, I'd drop Daisy off at her apartment, marveling at how a young lawyer like her had managed such a nice place. Then I'd head home, only to find Lauren arriving right after me. We exchanged looks, and I couldn't help but grin. She noticed immediately. "So how's your weekend been?" "Alone," she asked, her tone sharp. "How's Mr. Rich?" I smirked back. If she'd been honest, she might have admitted that while Jackson was thrilling, he wasn't exactly fulfilling. Instead, she replied, "He was great. I'll be going back next weekend. The girls won't be home until Sunday night." I could tell her plan was unraveling. She seemed unsettled, likely realizing the girls would soon pick up on the tension in our family. All week I met Daisy for lunch, and we made plans for a concert on Friday night, with the weekend to follow at her place. Back home, communication with Lauren became almost robotic, like two business partners. At work, she and Jackson kept things under wraps, and at home it was clear she was hoping I'd relent and make things easier. Not a chance. Every evening, I'd go to the guest house, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Most nights I'd take a walk around the backyard, examining Jackson's property on Google Maps. I'd even bought night vision goggles and a device to amplify sound from a distance, all paid for in cash, of course. When the weekend came, I enjoyed a fantastic time with Daisy. She had to leave Sunday for a family lunch, so we had a quiet morning before she headed out. Then I went over to Jackson's estate to gather more intel. I'd seen him and Lauren by the pool numerous times, and the directional mic I'd set up worked perfectly, even though most of their conversations were mundane. By the third week, the twins were back home, and they clearly sensed something was wrong. During dinner on Tuesday, Sandra spoke up. "Mom, Dad, what's going on?" Lauren tried to dismiss it, saying, "We're just working through some things, but don't worry." They turned to me, and I decided to be upfront. "The truth is, your mother has chosen to get involved with her boss, so I'm staying in the guest house. What happens next is still uncertain." Lauren was furious, but she couldn't deny it. She started to say, I felt like I needed, but Sarah cut her off. "A new man? Sure looks that way." "How could you, Mom?" Lauren got up and stormed upstairs. Sandra looked at me, her face serious. "Are you getting divorced, Dad?" I sighed. "I don't know yet, but can you both keep this between us for now?" They nodded in agreement. "I found someone new too," I added. "I'll introduce her to you this weekend when your mom goes to see her boyfriend." The girls were perceptive. "So, you really like her?" Sandra asked. "Maybe. I wouldn't have met Daisy if your mom hadn't made her choice." Sarah grinned, and Sandra asked, "How'd you meet her so fast?" I shrugged. We'd seen each other at lunch a few times. I guess I wondered if I was still well enough. But Daisy made it clear she wanted to go out with me. They fell silent, clearly uncomfortable, so I let them process. Finally, Sandra spoke. "When can we meet her?" "I'll set something up for the weekend. You have a game Saturday afternoon, right?" They nodded, and I added, "Maybe Daisy and I will come." I think it's time they seemed curious but a bit nervous about me bringing her around their friends' parents. I assured them not to worry, nothing was finalized, but it was clear their mother had changed everything for us. Lauren didn't come back downstairs that night. On Friday she headed back to Jackson's estate. She seemed to enjoy herself, though I sensed the thrill was wearing off. Jackson's stamina wasn't exactly on par, and his interests were limited. They spent all their time at the estate, never going out, but for now she seemed content with that. That same weekend, I took Daisy to a local club. One of her friends, Laura Blake, happened to be there, so we socialized a bit. I had no intention of hiding our relationship. We danced as if we owned the floor, then returned to her place around 1 a.m. When I got home, the twins were waiting in the living room with grins on their faces. "You girls have a game tomorrow, you should be asleep," I said. Sarah smirked. "We were waiting for you." Sandra added, "You're grinning, Dad." "Never mind, go to bed." "The game's at 10. Daisy will come with us." Daisy arrived early the next morning, and there was an awkward moment as I introduced her to the girls. "Daisy, this is Sandra and Sarah." Daisy smiled warmly. "Hey, I know this is a bit awkward, but we might have something in common. I played soccer in college." Sarah raised her eyebrows. "Where?" "Notre Dame," Daisy replied, surprising us all. The girls were impressed. Sarah, the mischievous one, tossed her a soccer ball, and Daisy showed off a quick trick, bouncing it on her knee before tossing it back. The girls were thrilled, and we headed to the field together. They played hard, commanding the midfield, while Daisy and I cheered from the stands. It was an intense game, tied in the final moments. Sarah came over, and Daisy gave her a quick tip. "They'll try to break through your side." "Stay sharp." Sarah nodded, intercepted the ball, took it downfield, and scored the winning goal. The crowd erupted. After the game, several parents came over to ask about Daisy. One parent, Joan Young, even asked if she was coaching the girls. "No," I said, "just a friend with plenty of experience." Their coach, Lena Holmes, recognized her and confirmed she'd played for Notre Dame. On the way home, Sandra couldn't resist. "Dad, you know everyone's going to talk, right?" "Let them," I replied with a grin. We stopped for pizza. Then Daisy and I went to her place for a bit before returning with Chinese takeout for dinner. As we headed to the guest house afterward, Sarah called out, "Keep it down, okay?" Daisy laughed, promising to try. As we left, I overheard the girls talking. They were processing the changes, coming to terms with the reality that our family life would never be the same. "It's not Dad's fault, right? Mom's the one who left for some jerk," Sandra whispered. "I hate what she's done to us," Sarah sighed, "but maybe things with Daisy won't be so bad." The next morning, Daisy helped the twins with soccer practice in the backyard before she headed off to visit her family. I sat with the girls afterward to talk things through, assuring them that even if Lauren and I separated, they'd still have both of us in their lives. That afternoon, Lauren walked in, and a tense silence settled over the room. She looked at the girls and said, "I want you to know I love you both, and I love your dad too." Sarah held her gaze. "That's what you say, but your actions show something else," Lauren tried to explain, but Sandra interrupted. "We're not so sure about that." After a tense silence, Lauren awkwardly offered to make dinner, though the atmosphere remained strained. During dinner, she asked about the soccer game, and the girls shared how Sarah scored the winning goal. I cleared the table and headed to the guest house, but Lauren followed me out, asking, "Can't you stay here tonight? You know, I didn't plan for things to end like this." "Lauren," I replied, "I think it's obvious our marriage is over. Stay with Jackson as long as you like, but just remember, he's all you've got now." She was stunned by my blunt response, let out a single sob, and ran upstairs. By morning, it was as if she'd decided to pretend nothing had changed. We both had work, and the girls were getting ready for their trip to my parents before heading off to camp. I grabbed lunch with Daisy, filling her in on what had happened after she left, then went home to help the twins pack. Lauren's day took an unexpected turn when her friend Joanne called. "Lauren, who was that young woman Lewis brought to the soccer game?" Joanne asked casually. Lauren hesitated. "What young woman?" she replied. "Oh, you know," Joanne continued, "the one who used to play soccer pretty too. We all noticed her. Where were you, by the way?" Lauren tried to stay calm, though her mind was racing. "Wait, Joanne, what exactly have you heard?" "Well," Joanne said, "Joe Taylor's cousin works for Mr. Ellison, and apparently his weekend company is, well, no secret. He's always got someone over when his wife's away. Lauren swallowed hard, realizing Joanne had pieced it together. It's not true, Lauren insisted. I didn't leave Louis. Doesn't matter if it's true or not, Joanne replied. All I know is Louis brought a younger, attractive woman to the game, and honestly, who could blame him? Lauren was genuinely taken aback. That evening, we dropped the girls at my parents' for their trip. The drive back was silent, but as soon as we got inside, Lauren slapped me hard across the face. You replaced me? You think you can just swap me out like that? She yelled. I stepped back, resisting the urge to shout. What did you expect, Lauren? You made your choice. How long did you think you could flaunt it in front of me like that? You were probably seeing her all along, weren't you? She accused. I shook my head. I only knew her from the cafe. We didn't even kiss until after you decided to run off with your boss. So yeah, Lauren, screw you. She stormed away, and I headed to the guest house. Later, I slipped on dark clothes and snuck out the back door. I had a spot near Jackson's estate, and tonight I was testing the sound amplification device I'd set up. Up in the tree, I positioned it and waited. Soon I spotted Jackson and his wife on their deck sharing wine under the patio lights. Their conversation came into focus, and what I heard made my blood boil. Jackson laughed and said, "It's not going to last, you've got your boy toy." His wife Vanessa shot back, "Only because you started it." "How many now, Jackson?" 4. 5, he shrugged. "I prefer married ones. It's fun watching them squirm, and I make sure their husbands know. They act tough at events, but none of them do anything." She chuckled, shaking her head. "One day, Jackson, you're going to cross the wrong person." He just laughed, unfazed. "They're too busy clinging to their families to do anything about it." Vanessa sighed, taking another sip of wine. "You really are something, Jackson. Good in bed, but the biggest jerk on the planet." Their conversation faded as they went inside, but his arrogance stuck with me. Until then, I'd questioned whether confronting Jackson was worth it, but now there was no doubt. The next day, I stopped by Mark's office to talk things over. That week, Daisy and I spent time with the girls, and it almost felt like a family. We watched the soccer game on Saturday, and Daisy gave them some pointers. That night, we had an incredible time together, and as we lay in bed, she asked, "So, what happens next?" "Louis," I laughed. "If you mean am I still attached to my wife, the answer is no. I'm a one-woman man now." She chuckled, relaxing in my arms. "It just feels so fast, after being together for so long." Lauren made her choice, I replied, and I made mine. When she went to him, I was done with her. Honestly, it's been a relief. The next morning, we went for a jog, then made breakfast together. Daisy headed to her parents early to help her mom with an elaborate cake project. I told the girls I'd be biking with Mark later and hugged each of them tightly before leaving. Earlier that week, I'd stashed the rifle near a tree close to Jackson's property, wrapped and ready. As I approached, I half hoped someone had taken it, but everything was as I'd left it. My mind kept circling back to that smug conversation I'd overheard, to seeing my own wife kissing that man. Enough was enough. After the ride, Mark and I sat down with some beers, chatting. Suddenly, Sally burst out of the house, pale-faced. "It's on the news, Jackson Ellison's been shot." "He's dead." I stood up, keeping my face neutral. "And Lauren?" I asked, my heart pounding. "They said a woman was with him, but she's unharmed," Sally replied. Mark took out his phone, checking the news feed, and showed it to Sally, who didn't think much of it. My phone was still in Mark's bag, so when he handed it to me, I pretended to call Lauren, but there was no answer. "I'd better head home in case someone calls," I said, grabbing my bike and heading back. As soon as I got in, the landline rang. "Is this Louis?" a voice asked. "Yes, it is. This is Detective William with the APD. There was a shooting. Your wife was there but wasn't hurt. Can you come down to pick her up?" Of course. We're main office, 3rd floor, just check in at the front desk. I put on some casual clothes over my cycling gear, grabbed my wallet and keys, and drove to the station, wondering what lay ahead. They directed me to a small room where I met Detective William, a fit older man with gray hair, and his partner, Detective Karen McCormack, a tall brunette with a sharp look about her. They asked me to walk them through my day, so I told them about the bike ride, the stops, everything. Then the questions grew tougher. "Did you know your wife was seeing Mr. Ellison?" William asked. "Yes," I replied honestly. "How did you feel about it?" "I didn't like it, but I moved on," I said, keeping my tone steady. "What do you mean by that?" he pressed. "It means I started seeing someone else. I found someone new." "Do you have an open marriage?" Karen asked, raising an eyebrow. No, I clarified. The moment she told me about seeing him, I was done. They exchanged a look. Do you own any firearms? Yes, I keep them in a safe, I answered. We may need to check that, William said, glancing at Karen. Fine, I replied. I'll go back with you. They noted down my account of the day, including addresses and everyone I'd interacted with, then left me alone in the room for a while, locking the door behind them. I sat there, staring at my phone, replaying everything in my head. About 15 minutes later, Detective William returned and asked if they could take a look at my phone. I hesitated. The phone had work-related information I wasn't eager to share, but there was nothing incriminating on it. Detective William made it clear they could obtain a warrant if needed, so I handed it over, agreeing they could keep it for 30 minutes. Soon after, they brought me to see Lauren. She wore borrowed jeans and a t-shirt, looking shaken. Lauren, are you okay? I asked. No, Lewis. He got shot. I was right there. There was blood everywhere. I'm sorry, Lauren. Once they're done with my phone, I'll take you home. All right, she nodded, then paused before adding, I regret everything. Maybe we can talk on the way home. I gave her a brief hug. Shortly after, the detective returned my phone, and we left the station in silence. In the car, she broke it. Lewis, did you shoot him? I glanced at her. No. And while I don't regret that he's gone, I didn't do it. She studied me, as if unsure whether to believe me. I know you, Lewis. You're capable of it. But you found someone else, didn't you? I shook my head. I didn't need to. Did you actually see it happen? No, I just heard the shot, and then. It was chaos. She broke down, and by the time we reached home, she was exhausted. I helped her inside, then went to the gun safe for the police to examine. They checked everything, particularly focusing on a sealed box of .30 caliber ammo. Detective William turned to me. We'll be testing for fingerprints and DNA, Mr. Bell. Don't interfere. I don't know anything about it and didn't shoot anyone, I replied calmly. Once they left, I went back in to deal with Lauren. Before joining her, I called Daisy, briefly explaining the situation and asking if she could come by later. She agreed, and I then called my parents and the girls to update them and confirm they'd still go to camp next week. Lauren took a long shower, eventually coming out in a robe, looking drained. Must have been rough, I asked gently. She managed a small smile. I don't think I've ever been so shaken. Want some pizza? I'm ordering, I offered. She nodded, and I placed the order. Over dinner, she looked at me, troubled. I keep thinking about everything. I can't be sure you're innocent, Lewis. I leaned back, unfazed. I told you I was out biking with Mark. I even told the detectives. He wouldn't lie for me. Lauren sighed, still looking skeptical. Maybe. It's just, I know you were angry. Yes, Lauren, I was angry. But I didn't kill him. After a pause, I added, Are you asking for a divorce? Maybe, she murmured quietly. After all these years, I needed something. I thought he was attractive, but honestly, he wasn't much at all. Yeah, I figured as much. I looked at her, bluntly. So why bring up Daisy? Heard she's younger and athletic. Yes, Lauren admitted. Did she just come on to you? It wasn't like that. I met her around the time you and Jackson started up. She was quiet, then asked, What happens now? I may not have a job, and you'll probably leave me. I shrugged. I'll make sure you're taken care of. As for work, that'll likely depend on Vanessa's mood just then. Daisy called, so I walked into the living room to answer. Lauren followed, perhaps hoping to catch a hint of my intentions. When I hung up, she surprised me by saying, Let her come over, Lewis. I think it's time we met. Half an hour later, Daisy arrived. Lauren, now dressed and looking weary but composed, stood across from her. The two women looked each other over in silence until Daisy spoke. I'm sorry, this must be difficult. Lauren nodded, looking worn. It's confusing. You took my husband. Daisy stood her ground. You left him. That wasn't my fault. They stood about 10 feet apart, and I positioned myself nearby, just in case. Lauren started to tremble and then suddenly broke into tears. Daisy stepped forward and hugged her, letting her cry it out. I was honestly amazed. She helped Lauren to the couch and sat beside her, keeping close. I sat on her other side, placing a comforting arm around her. Lauren gasped for air between sobs. I've been such a fool. When she calmed down, she asked me, "Do you think the hot water's ready?" "Maybe," I replied, and she got up to take another shower. Afterward, she took a sleeping pill and fell asleep in our bed. Daisy and I went to the guest room. Neither of us wanted to leave her alone that night. We watched the 10 News, which was all about Jackson's murder. Apparently, he'd had affairs with multiple married employees. I wasn't the only one with a motive. The speculation included business connections, and some even hinted online that his wife might have been involved. By 11, I turned off the TV, and we went to bed, both too drained for anything else. In the morning, I checked on Lauren, who slept until 9. By 10, the three of us sat at the breakfast table, enjoying pancakes Daisy had made. Mid-bite, Daisy's phone rang. It was the police, requesting an interview. "Should I ask them to come here?" she offered. Lauren nodded. "Might as well. We could use an update." Detectives William and McCormack arrived, taking Daisy to a separate room to get her statement. About 25 minutes later, we all gathered in the living room. Lauren looked up, asking, "Any leads on who did it?" McCormack shook her head. "Not yet. There are plenty of motives, including Mr. Bell's," she said, giving me a serious look. I frowned. "Right. Well, thanks for keeping us informed." After they left, Sally called, mentioning the police had interviewed her as well. They were polite but thorough, she said. I assured her I'd catch up with Mark at work later. Sitting on the back patio with coffee, I noticed Lauren seemed to be calming down, though her sadness lingered. Meanwhile, I sensed both Daisy and I were bracing for whatever fallout was yet to come. Lauren rubbed her temples. "I keep seeing him just lying there. I wonder if that image will ever fade." Daisy reached out, resting a hand on her arm. "In my grief psychology class, they said those images fade over time." Lauren nodded, her voice cracking. "I really hope that's true." "Have you heard anything from work?" I asked her. "Not yet. I worked directly with Jackson, handled his logistics, showed him certain things, and managed others myself. Whoever takes over will need someone with my skills." "Do you think it'll be Vanessa?" Daisy asked. "Probably," Lauren replied. "I saw his will. She gets everything, except a few personal items for his mother." "Well," I said, glancing at Daisy, "until things settle, I'm not going anywhere." Lauren sighed. "Did you stay in the house last night?" Daisy nodded. "In the guest room." Lauren paused, and with a faint smile said, "I hope you'll stay at least until I'm back on my feet." There was an undertone neither of us missed, and I could tell Daisy caught it. "Things will work out on their own," I reassured her. "The girls will be back next week," Daisy added. "I went to their game, by the way. It was really something." Lauren gave a weak smile, wiping away a tear. "I missed it. I feel so foolish. Jackson manipulated so many of us." Daisy offered some comfort. "You're not alone. We all make mistakes, and he was charming. But you're stronger than that." "I think you've been unhappy for a while," I said, watching Lauren closely. "At home, not at work." She considered this, nodding slowly. "That's true. I don't even know when it started. Maybe it was just that grass is greener feeling." She trailed off, her expression clouded. "But I went too far and wrecked everything abruptly." She got up and went into the kitchen. Soon I heard the clattering of pots and pans. When I checked, I found her baking a chocolate cake, her go-to comfort when times were tough. Daisy and I eventually wandered in, chatting idly as we watched her frost the cake. We made sandwiches and snacked while we waited. The day passed quietly. We had burgers for dinner, and Lauren made a salad. The three of us kept busy, avoiding conversations about the future. By 9 p.m., Lauren went to bed, but twice during the night, nightmares jolted her awake, once loudly enough that I went in to calm her down. The next morning, Daisy left for work, and I debated going into the office myself, though I felt uneasy leaving Lauren alone. While I was deciding, her phone rang. It was Vanessa. Lauren put it on speaker. "Are you coming in today?" Vanessa asked bluntly. "I know it's tough, but there's work to do, and I can't replace you immediately. For now, I need your help." Lauren glanced at me, and I gave her a slight nod. "I'll be there in an hour." "Good. Use the back entrance to avoid any reporters," Vanessa instructed before hanging up. When Lauren arrived at Vanessa's office, they shook hands, and Vanessa got straight to the point. "So, why did you fall for Jackson exactly?" she asked. Lauren blushed. He looked appealing, but in reality he didn't live up to it. At best he was inconsistent. Not surprising, Vanessa replied dryly. Let's get to work. They spent the day reviewing everything Jackson had managed. Around 6 p.m., Vanessa looked up and asked, "Can you stay for dinner? We still have a lot to go over." "Sure. Louis and his girlfriend are home," Lauren replied with a note of resignation. Vanessa nodded, smiling slightly. "Yes, I heard she's quite attractive." Lauren admitted, "She's young, athletic, and my daughters seem to like her. She and Louis connected the night I left." Vanessa studied her. "If you need company, I could lend you one of my boys. They know how to keep a woman satisfied." Lauren flushed. "Thanks, but I'm not ready for that yet." "Whenever you are," Vanessa laughed. "Now that we're in charge, maybe some of these guys will have to make room." After dinner, Lauren came home around 9:30, sharing a bit about her day with us. She mentioned her new position, saying, "I'll be able to support myself, so I won't be a burden." I tried to reassure her, but she chuckled. "Vanessa offered me a boy toy if I wanted one." Daisy gasped, amused. "Really? What do they look like?" I felt a twinge of irritation but stayed silent. Lauren shrugged. "I honestly didn't even know she had them." Over the next 6 weeks, Lauren worked closely with Vanessa, becoming a valuable asset to the business. About 2 weeks in, I filed for divorce, which didn't surprise her or the girls. Vanessa hired her a lawyer, but the arrangements were straightforward, and we quickly came to an agreement. A few weeks later, it was finalized. The girls stayed with me, and Daisy, who moved in and easily took on a motherly role. Our home began to settle into a comfortable rhythm. One evening, after an especially tender moment, I turned to Daisy and asked, "Would you want to get married?" She tensed a little, then smiled and kissed me. "I'd love to. I want children, too." She looked at me with a mix of excitement and nerves, and I hugged her tightly. "I'm ready to jump back into diaper duty." We married 6 months later, and Daisy was pregnant within a couple of months. Meanwhile, the investigation into Jackson's murder stalled, and soon the case faded from public attention. The police thoroughly checked alibis for all suspects, including husbands with motives, but nothing led anywhere. Even Vanessa was questioned, but her alibi, corroborated by 2 men miles away, held up. In the end, the case went cold, and the media only mentioned it occasionally. Lauren continued to excel at work, becoming Vanessa's right hand. One Saturday, while she was at Vanessa's house, she faced her fear of the pool. Vanessa brought her out to the poolside, where 2 well-built men, one black and one white, waited. Vanessa nudged her. "You haven't relaxed in ages, go ahead, pick one." After a moment, Lauren dropped her robe, introduced herself to one of the men, Damon, and finally allowed herself to let go, confronting her fear. That day marked a new chapter for her, one with fulfillment she hadn't expected. Sundays became family days. Sometimes Lauren spent them with the girls, and occasionally with me and Daisy as well. When our son was born, she was genuinely happy for us, though I noticed a faint glimmer of longing in her smile. Not long after, Daisy became pregnant with our daughter, and our family expanded. Life settled into a new, peaceful normal. One evening, while Sally and I were walking around the yard, we paused by the guest house. She looked at me knowingly. "You know, I get along with Daisy really well. I'm glad you're happy." I smiled back. "Back in the day, you could have had me." She nodded with a glint in her eye. "I know, but I chose Mark. You always had that quiet anger, Louis. You tried to hide it, but I saw it even back then." She laughed. "No, Louis, that's just who you are. But remember, Mark and I still care about you." The months passed, and life moved on peacefully. The Ellison case faded into history, barely mentioned anymore. Daisy and I settled into a comfortable life, thrilled with our growing family. Lauren became indispensable at Vanessa's company and found a new, unconventional happiness. The twins adapted well, supported by both of us, and life moved forward, allowing us each to heal old wounds, forge new connections, and finally leave the past behind.